Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're making miso butter lobster rolls on Bao Buns. To start this dish, we need 2/3 of a cup of warm water, 2 teaspoons of dry active yeast, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. Give that a little stir and set that aside for 5 minutes to let that yeast bloom. Next up, we need 1 1/4 cup of bread flour or all-purpose flour, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and a teaspoon of kosher salt. Just run that through a strainer to get out any lumps in the flour. Once the yeast is bloomed, add a tablespoon of vegetable oil, give that a little mix, and pour that directly into your dry ingredients. Once all the liquid is in, you're going to use a stiff spatula to mix that around until you get a shaggy dough and all the water has absorbed into the flour. Then get in there with your hands and knead that for about 10 minutes. Yes, you could use a stand mixer, but I think it's more fun to get in there with your hands and feel what you're making. After 10 minutes, you should have a nice cohesive dough. We are going to cover this with a damp tea towel and let this rest for 2 hours or until the dough has doubled in size. Now it's been 2 hours and you can see how much this dough has risen. Now this is a super sticky dough, so we are going to have to flour our bench, but don't use a heavy hand. We don't want to introduce a ton of flour back into this dough because we want to keep it as light as possible. So once your bench is floured, punch down the gas and tip this out onto your floured workspace. Once you have that all out of your bowl, we're going to knead this for another 7 minutes because we want a soft, beautiful, pillowy, cohesive dough. And then we're going to cover with a tea towel and let rest for 5 minutes while we adjust our lobster. I'm using 4 lobster tails, but use a whole lobster if that's what you prefer. In a large pot of boiling water, we're going to season this generously with salt. When you boil a lobster, a lot of that flavor goes away, and we want to reintroduce it back into our lobster tails. We're going to let these boil for 8 minutes, until that shell is bright orange and your meat is opaque, and we're going to pop this into ice water to stop that cooking process. Now back to our Bao Buns. I wanted to make these look more like hot dog rolls, like a typical lobster roll. You don't have to go through all this if you don't want to. I just thought this would be more fun. So I'm flouring my pin to avoid any tears or ripping. I'm going to roll this out to a 1/4 inch thick, somewhat rectangle shape, and then I'm going to use a straight edge that I only use for food, and a pizza cutter. I'm going to cut this in half and then into quarters. Any of those scraps I have left over, I'm going to re-roll and roll out to another Bao Bun. Now we have to oil these so they don't stick when they steam, and I happened to fry some ginger chips earlier in the day, so that is the oil that I'm going to use to brush on this. Of course, if you don't have ginger oil, plain old vegetable oil is fine. So just using a pastry brush, I'm going to brush on this infused oil on both sides of our dough. We're also going to need a little piece of parchment to sandwich in between, and then we're going to fold these Bao Buns in half. We're going to place these spaced a little bit apart on a parchment-lined steamer basket. I've oiled that parchment in the steamer basket as well. We're going to pop the lid on, and again, let this rest for 5 minutes. Now for the fillings of our lobster roll, I have some garlic chives here. Substitute them with regular chives if that's all you have, just giving these a nice little choppity chop. 2 little scallions as well, and some celery. I'm using Chinese celery, just use domestic if that's what you have. I just like Chinese celery because it's skinnier and it's leafier, and I like that added texture of the leaves in this. For the miso butter, we have 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which is important because miso is very salty. We're going to add in 2/3 of a teaspoon of white miso. Mix this around until it's all incorporated throughout the butter. As another layer of flavor to this butter, we are going to grate in the peel of 1 whole lemon. Just zest that right in. I'm going to save you the struggle of me pulling out this meat, but pull out your lobster meat and just give it a rough chop. Now we're ready to steam our Bao Buns for 15 minutes over boiling water. And in a separate saute pan, I'm adding in 3 tablespoons of this miso butter over low heat. I don't want this to separate or break. Tossing in 2 cloves of crushed garlic and all of our lobster meat. Now I'm only going to toss this over the heat for 30 seconds before I shut off the heat and continue to toss this until everything is coated. I don't want to overcook our lobster meat. We're adding in a half teaspoon of salt and some freshly ground black pepper, giving it a taste and adjusting the seasoning as needed. When your baos are done cooking, prop open that lid and let that steam for about 3 minutes. Now we can fish out our garlic cloves, adding in a little bit of our celery, chive, and scallion. Again, you can add more, you can't take it away, and you really do want the lobster to be the star of this dish. Take out this big boy because we don't need it, and finishing off with a little bit more lemon zest. Now to plate, I'm just taking one of our little golden delicious Bao Buns, prying it open, and stuffing as much lobster meat as I possibly can into this Bao Bun. I actually did film me tasting this, but my camera battery died and I didn't realize it, so I don't have that footage. So I will just explain to you what this tasted like. That miso butter made the lobster meat even sweeter. You get all of that umami from the miso butter, you get the sweetness from the lobster, the crunch from all those vegetables that we added, and those Bao Buns are pillowy, soft, and perfect. But there they are. Lobster in miso butter on Bao Buns, my version of a lobster roll. I hope you all try to make these. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you loved it, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell because I put out new videos every Thursday. Thank you again, and until next time, happy cooking.